Welcome to Finding Hope, The End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Patricia Raskin, and welcome to Finding Hope, The End of Suffering, with Barry Weinhold, who created this terrific podcast based on his book. And I'm Patricia Raskin, the co-host, and really happy to be here. And Barry, we've been working with Susan Bloom. I know that, on these podcasts, we're spending, several episodes with one person to really find out what their story is and what they
Yeah, we
went
need to
through.
go in depth, and that's why we're doing it that way, so that people can really understand the flow and the depth.
Right.
Oftentimes you start interviewing somebody and you never get to the real depth, and that's what we want to get to, and we're starting to get
Right.
there.
And some of these types of stories are in your new book called
Yeah.
Getting Real, and people can find that as well by going to your website.
Right, and it's also available at Amazon.
Okay, and that's weinhold.org.
That's the website. Yes, that's
Right.
the URL.
Okay, good.
Right.
So where we are, Barry, do you just want to give a quick synopsis of kind of, where Susan is and where we kind of left off for
Susan started by talking a lot about her birth and what happened to her, and she had a mother who had a mental illness and also had postpartum depression, or maybe psychosis. And I had a mother like that, so I could identify with her really closely. My mother was psychotic when after I was born, and she tried to drown me, and Susan's mother tried to smother her. So very similar kind of things happened. Mine happened at 5 weeks. Hers was in the first 2 weeks. And then she talked a lot about being a miner's daughter and in a mining family, and what that was like, and how they moved a lot, and they were often outcast by the people that they moved into a new community, and they were seen as sort of kind of not the usual kind of citizens of the community. They were outsiders, and they were mining people, which cast them into a category, which then she had to work her way out of it when she got to school and things. And so there was a lot of dynamics and all that. And then her surgery at age 12 or 13, where she had all her vertebrae fused, and painful major surgeries, 2 of them, and the effect that had on her whole outlook in life. I mean, she wanted to be a dancer and a gymnast, and then suddenly that was not possible anymore.
And so now what we're looking at is kind of how she started to do the healing work.
Well, let's look a little bit more into some of the things that happened to her after that, and then I think we can start to move into the healing work after she shared a little bit more about what happened in her marriages and after that, because I know there's some of that story, so I know it's very interesting for people to know.
All right, so we're going to bring Susan back on.
Yep.
Hello. Hi, we just gave a synopsis of where we've been in the last couple of episodes, and so now we're going to talk about sort of the next part of your life with your marriage and where this went from here.
So what happened in that part of your life that caused suffering?
Well, there were several things. I started having post-traumatic stress disorder, but I had no idea what was going on. With the birth of my first child, I would want to stop him crying, and I would just see these pictures of not so much me, but like the back of me and smothering the baby.
That we recall.
And I mean, that just totally freaked me out. So I started therapy.
Yeah.
And also there were some other post-traumatic stress disorder incidences that were happening. So I thought possibly I was mentally ill like my mom. She would be classified as bipolar with schizoid affect if she was diagnosed in this day and age. She was given the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And so that's what I grew up with. And also I felt numb and dumb with my wonderful baby boy. And I remember myself just freezing, being at the edge of his crib, and he's crying for me, and just being frozen and wondering what was wrong with me, because I wanted to reach out to him and I was just frozen.
At that time,
And
you hadn't remembered all the things or you hadn't connected the dots with
I hadn't connected the dots. I have now. Otherwise, I don't think I could be talking about this without, being on my knees crying. Yeah. So there was this transition of my post-traumatic stress disorder becoming bigger and bigger, and not really having, like, where does this belong? So I started therapy, and we were a low-income family. So low-income therapy does not give you a lot of options in terms of being able to get the help you need.
Right.
The other thing that I learned, and I learned this really early, is there are very few therapists that were prepared to deal with someone who had come from a violent background and could really be angry. And they didn't know how to be present with that. So I went through a series of therapists because they had a program 68 weeks. I also found that I didn't have to be with a therapist that was not good for me.
That happens to a lot of people, unfortunately. And what we found is that if therapists have not studied trauma and worked on their own trauma, they can't take their clients very deep.
No, they can't.
Their clients present trauma. They just don't know how to handle it. And often we'll try to, divert the client into something more safer to talk about.
Yeah. So that was my early years of therapy, but I kept at it because it did give me, it gave me information, and also it gave me a safe adult to have some bonding with, and to really learn some skills on interaction, communication. I learned about what codependency was.
Yeah.
I started to challenge my relationship with the kid's dad.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, that was my question, is how did you choose him? What was, how did you choose him? And then how did you realize maybe it wasn't the right fit?
Oh, well, I met him when I was a student I was 19, he was 26. He had been in Europe and had hitchhiked across the north of Africa.
Wow.
So he was my first hippie person, up close and personal. And he came from Leadville, Colorado. So he was from a mining family.
Interesting.
He was well-read, definitely a genius IQ. He taught himself how to play classical guitar, and part of his scholarship at Colorado College was teaching music theory and beginning classical guitar. So he's a person who can read instructions and then sit down and do it. And he was also active in mountaineering medicine, mountaineering rescue. So he was this brainiac who was a wild man and loved the great outdoors. So he introduced me to climbing, and also the philosophy. He was at CC as a philosophy major. And he also introduced me to the humanistic psychologist. And that really rang a bell for me about reading Viktor Frankl, how to do that because I was really struggling.
A man's search for meaning.
Yeah. So he brought me these things, and you know, I mean, it was amazing. And he was as far away from redneck as I could get. Yeah.
So there were a lot of things that worked for you.
Yeah, very much so.
What didn't work? What in whatever happened, what moved that
Well,
away?
I quit drinking. I quit drinking.
Oh,
I quit drinking just before I got pregnant with our first child.
Wow.
And so that changed a lot of the dynamics. And then with me being in therapy, I was less codependent. And so what fit for us didn't work anymore. And he wasn't ready to take those kind of steps because what we had in common was a real lack of trust of other people, really having to rely on ourselves, you know, to a fault.
Mhm.
And so with progress that I made, I mean, where it did work for us, I mean, it wasn't there anymore. You know, I couldn't dovetail into those areas because I had grown too much. And my feeling of myself at that time is that I knew that I was not a whole person. I felt like I had these big holes in me. And I wanted to see what I could do to find wholeness for myself and also how far I could go with it. And
Hmm.
I mean, to have the life that I have now has just been, it's like I can still just pinch myself.
Because you created it based on it.
Yeah,
Barry,
yeah.
Barry, I want to ask you something, you know, in all the work you do with couples, do you think this is the crux of why couples often don't make it? Because one is growing and the other one just isn't willing to grow or doesn't think they need to grow. You stop being on the same page. What do you think?
That's absolutely right, Patricia. And most couples, one starts growing before the other, and then it is dependent on how the other reacts to that. They might say, "Oh, good, you're learning some new things. Teach me what you're learning," and then they start growing. Or they might do what your husband did and say, "No, that's not for me," and then the distance occurs in the relationship, and it gets further and further apart.
Right. Yeah. But also too, Susan, I mean, you know, the one thing I like to look at is, you know, what are the building blocks? And, you know, all of these hard times you had were like building you like a fighter. I mean, all the fighting that you did, building you so you could be strong enough to be able to go on your own and to develop your own path and to find your own way in your own profession where you could really utilize your strength.
So the all the growth you were doing, it was advancing your consciousness, expanding it.
Yeah.
And when did you start connecting the dots? When did you start seeing that what you were dealing with in present time was connected to things that happened in your past? How?
I think I always had an awareness of it.
Aha.
There's, and that's part of why I was so angry as a kid and with a chip on my shoulder. I was not going to tolerate what I had to deal with at home,
Mhm.
at school, or any other place in my life.
Yeah.
And so there was that. I want to make a comment. One of the biggest things that the kid's dad did for me was to bring home a book that was about this thick, and it was about people who had cosmic consciousness
Oh.
experiences. And one of his professors loaned him that book. The pages were onion thin or onion skin thin. And I read that, and that's when I realized that I'm kind of a visionary and a mystic.
Uh-huh.
I see things and sense things that other people are going, well, what? And then I started to understand that. So my kid's dad was a very, very special person and really provided a lot of growth for me and a lot of safety.
That all that study that you did allowed you to finally name some of the
Mhm.
things you were experiencing, to find words for them, the experiences, and that is obviously a way of healing some
Mhm.
of our past when we begin to name it and tame it and understand why we behave the way we do.
Yeah, and then there's the body work. I traded with like a friend. He was a family friend, but it was a friend of the kid's dad, and he was a diabetic, and we used to do massage on each other. And both of us would have like releases, and we were able to facilitate each other.
Wow.
One of the things that grew out of that is that I started having people show up having their own post-traumatic stress disorder events, and I would take them through that. And I just had the instinct. Later, after the kid's dad and I separated, I became a potter. I had the kids for I was the parent for several years, and that's when we had guys coming back from Vietnam, and there's a few that wound up on my doorstep asking for help, and they said, they told me to come here. And, I got my kids taken care of and just was able to be there, do some body work and help them move that out of their system um, where it was different. I didn't realize that I was working with the nervous system as well as the body.
Yeah.
And I could feel that there was such a difference, when the nervous system really starts discharging, it changes everything. It changes everything in the body.
Right.
And I didn't have a language for that until after I had graduated from massage school and I was studying Thomas Hanna's work, Hanna Somatics, which is movement work, but it describes the reflexes that get us up, the Landau, where we arc our back as a baby. If that is overstimulated, we see the military posture,
Yeah.
muscles that are just, they don't let down. And then there's the startle reflex or the duck and cover. This is what gives us our locomotion. So these two things are really primary in terms of our locomotion as babies.
Yeah.
That duck and cover is there. Well, then you can have the dowager's hump, or what I see is like with the computer geeks, they have a flat butt and they look like a question mark.
Yeah.
If you do a side profile. And
Well, I want to comment on the fact that all the body experiences that you had growing up
Mhm.
kind of led you to all this. I mean, it was like, if you hadn't had those experiences, would you have really focused so much on the body? I mean, it seems like a very almost a gift that you're given, even though at the time it was suffering and pain and all the agony you went through with the surgeries. But in the long run, now that you look back on it, it provided you with information about how important the body was.
Yeah.
That then when you got training, you could use, because I think the most powerful treatment for PTSD is body work. Because it really, the body never lies. And,
Yeah.
and people can make up things and they can get confused mentally, but the body never gets confused. And if you know how to access that as a skilled body worker, it's a brilliant work. And so I mean, I can see how that all came out of your childhood and your experience with your back and your surgeries and all the things that went wrong with your body forced you to really pay attention to your body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's an old saying, you teach what you need to learn. And I am that person.
I'm laughing because that's my mantra. I mean, that's what I talk about all the time when I do my work. And
Yeah.
it came from a book by Richard Bach called Illusions.
Yes.
In Illusions, Jonathan Livingston Seagull says, the seagull, the parable, says,
Mhm.
you teach what you need most to learn.
Yeah.
That's what we do. And that's what I've done my whole life. Whenever I needed something, I went out and taught it, and that's how I got it.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I did, Patricia.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think those are the best teachers
Yeah, I do too.
too, because we're really getting it. Yeah.
So, I mean, go on to your story a little bit more. We have a few more.
Well, yeah, I mean, that made me my own laboratory.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Being-
go ahead. I was going to say that in our next segment, what we'll talk about is really the healing work, right, Barry? How you really got into the healing work and what you're doing to help other people.
Yeah. So very good. Thank you, Susan, for sharing all that. That's brilliant. I mean, just to see that happening in a person, how they were able to take what most people would say is terrible, to have all those surgeries as a 12-year-old or 13-year-old. And now to be able to take all that and find a way to give to people this skill you've developed of healing people. So
it's very inspiring. Yeah. And I'm sure that even though it's been hard for you, that it gives you a lot of source of strength to know that you are helping people and that you are making a difference.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to close for this segment. We're going to come back with Susan again next week for our fourth segment, or our third segment with Susan on finding hope, the end to suffering, and created by Barry Weinhold, and who invited me to be co-host, and I'm delighted. And we'll be talking more with Susan next week about, how she moved into healing and what she's doing to help other people and how she helps them move through it.
Right.
So you don't want to miss that. So thank you so much, Susan. And
thank you, Susan.
yeah, Barry, we'll see you next week, and Susan as well.
Same place, same time.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real: The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope, The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.